Someone in the crowd said to him, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" Then he said to them, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops." Then he said, "This is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, and be merry." But God said to him, "You fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then who will get what you have prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich towards God."
So excited about doing this. I'm glad Ben reminded me that he was reading before I get up here. I am excited to be part of this series that Scott launched last week, this idea of generosity journey. And because of that, I want to review just a little bit, if you weren't here, or even if you were here, because if you're like me, you forget very easily, some of the things that Scott pointed out, because they do tie directly in to the story that we're covering this morning that Jesus told. So the key verse that Scott had was this one right here from Matthew. It says, Jesus talking here on the Sermon on the Mount, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moths and vermin destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store for yourselves treasures in heaven where moths and vermin do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." And here's the key part. "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." One of the main points that Scott had is about this idea that Jesus says treasure and hearts are connected. And that his key point was that you can direct your heart by directing your treasure. Often we think that we invest in what we care about, but really where we invest, our heart follows that. But we can direct our heart by how we direct our treasure. Another key point that Scott pointed out was through this idea is discipleship, following Jesus, being an apprentice of Jesus, and stewardship, managing the things we have. They're linked together. There's no such thing as a disciple that doesn't deal with the stewardship. They are tied together, and Jesus made that clear. A disciple is going to be a good steward, because the key part of that is we are stewards. We are managers, not owners. What we have, the blessings, everything is not ours. We simply get to manage it on behalf of the one who gave it to us. Often we think, if you're a church person, you hear this word tithe, well, that 10%, that's God's, but the rest is in my domain. But as Jesus taught, Scott pointed out last week, all of it is in God's domain. We're just managers. And our goal is to be good managers. Well, so I'm excited about this, and I've got some stories I want to share today. I'm going to start us off with a story and close us with a story. And if you're watching and paying attention to this, they're about, let me clear, older people. Can I just say that? Can I say that? Because I'm older. These stories, I've told this one before, used it in a different way, but this is the story of this man right here. It starts off with this guy, André François Raffet. They're French. If I mess it up and you know French, please forgive me. But this man, the story is incredible about a legendary apartment deal this guy made. This guy in 1965 made a deal with this next person right here, Jean Clement. And again, I probably said that wrong. He made a deal in 1965 with her to pay her a certain amount of money per month. It was around maybe about $500 if you can get the exchange and the time right. And when she passed, he would get her apartment in France. At the time, in 1965, she was 90 years old. Seemed like a great deal. Do this for a little bit, the apartment is his. And he thought, that's just the incredible real estate deal, that sum and getting that done for that period of time. But here's the key thing you need to know. She lived until 1997. 22 more years. You think that's funny? Andre Francois passed away in 1995. And because of the setup, his family paid those next 2 years on that apartment. He paid more than double the apartment value and never got to live in it, never got to possess it. And it's a true story. You think that this was a wise deal. This guy probably thought he was definitely wise, that he knew what he was talking about, that he made the best deal possible. This is a 90-year-old woman. 10 years, maybe. In fact, if you read the story, she smoked and drank a lot. There's a picture of her, and it's like a smokestack. And she kept going. He thought, this is a wise decision. He looked at it and went, I can't lose. But now he is known as a fool because it didn't quite work out the way he thought it would. And today we're going to look at a story that Jesus told where a guy thought he was wise and God called him a fool. We may think we're being wise, but God often looks at us and says, that's so foolish. That is not the way it needs to be. Ben read us this story. We're going to jump back into Luke and walk through some of this, and we're going to see some things that we can gain so we don't have God looking at us going, you foolish person. Let's jump into Luke chapter 12, verse 13 through 21. Well, the story began. Jesus, I believe, is moving along. There's a crowd. There's definitely a lot of people together. They're, in a sense, on their way towards, slowly moving towards Jerusalem. So the crowd continues to grow. And someone in the crowd shouts out, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." So now here's what's going on here. In that time, the oldest child, the oldest son, got a double portion, usually, of an estate when the patriarch passed on. And a portion went to the younger. I'm not sure what's going on here yet, if that's not happening, but basically this guy yells out to Jesus, because they often asked rabbis to make decisions on points of law. And he yells out to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." And I can kind of picture this. Jesus is walking along with the apostles and the crowds, and this yell, "Teacher, tell my brother." And I think Jesus almost just kind of does this, doesn't pause much, doesn't even look back. And here's Jesus' answer. Jesus replied, "Man, who made me a judge or an arbitrator between you?" He doesn't even take the time to answer. I'm not dealing with that kind of thing. That is not what I'm about. Whether it was fair or unfair, Jesus says, that's not my focus. But then I think he does stop. And he uses this as a teaching moment, one of those key times where he can use a situation and bring light and wisdom to his followers. So he stops and he tells this story. First he says, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed." He says, life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. So he stops. He said, you got to stop and realize this, guys. Don't be asking me to divide up estates because it's not about the stuff. Watch out. Be on your guard. You got to be careful with this stuff. Because Jesus says, here's the important thing you need to get. Stuff does not equal life. Life does not consist in an abundance of stuff. He said, I want you to get that. But Jesus, being the incredible master teacher that he is, he doesn't stop there. Because he knows that what sticks with us, what would stick with his disciples, is a story. So he tells this one. He told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, that's key, remember that. What shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I'll do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones. And there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, get a theme here, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. See, Jesus tells this and starts telling this thing, and he's not saying, hey, guess what? It's bad to be rich. Jesus never said that. But he does teach us through so many of his things that it's not bad to be rich, but it's really easy to be bad at being rich. To get it confused with truly God's blessing. See, because this guy, he's blessed with an incredible abundance. And he comes up with a plan. And it's a good plan. This is a guy that we initially, in the story, if you didn't know the rest of it, go, hey, smart guy. You got a lot of stuff. You need to create a place to hold more of that stuff so you can enjoy life. See, this is the thing that we're going to find out. As we deal with this thing, Jesus said, be careful about all kinds of greed, because greed disguises itself often as wisdom. This guy's plan seemed wise to him. It seemed wise to those initially listening to it. Building bigger barns is reasonable. But Jesus is going to point out, with the wrong attitude, it can be spiritually deadly. So this guy sets us up to compare the idea of this foolish thinking with wise thinking. See, the man in the end of the story is called a fool by God, but he thinks he's being wise. And Jesus will point out through this the struggle that these two things, foolish thinking and wise thinking, are polar opposites. Because this guy had all this stuff. His assumption was that all of this was for his consumption. His foolish thinking assumes the surplus is their own, for their own comfort. That's what foolish thinking is. Jesus says, if you're being foolish, you look at what you have and this extra, and you think, yeah, that's for me. That's why I have it. God has blessed me. Remember, as you walk through the story, me comes up a lot, and I, because he thought it was all for himself. But wise thinking is different. Wise thinking with this abundance asks, why has God given me this? And what does he want me to do with it? So different than this idea of it's all for me and my comfort. It says if you were a wise farmer, if you were a wise man, when you had this abundance, your first thought wouldn't have been, what shall I do for me? It should have been, wow, God's given me something. I should probably ask him what I should do with this abundance. Such a contrast from what happens in the story. But it doesn't end there. Let's go back to what the farmer's saying here. He says to himself, you have plenty laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. Now, Jesus isn't saying, hey, don't plan, don't save, But he's saying you've got to have the right attitude when you do this. He thinks this is all for himself, and he thinks it's for his comfort. He's made this assumption that the abundance is giving him life because he thinks he's got many years to go. He looks at what he has and he says, it's all for me to take care of me, and that means I'm going to be okay. I can relax and not worry about anything, and I can take life easy. And this is a very, very secular phrase. Eat, drink, and be merry. And he says, that's what I'm going to do. But that's just foolish thinking. It's not wise thinking at all, because it is not what God would have him do. See, his assumption was that it was all for him and that it was going to make life easy. But abundance does not equal security. It does not mean he's going to have time. See, the foolish thinking here is that he believes long life and wealth go together. They go hand in hand. I've got wealth, so that means I've got enough life to enjoy it. That's foolish thinking, Jesus says, because the wise thinking realizes that we remember every life, no matter how rich, has an expiration date. Jesus is pointing out, we think we've got time because we have stuff, but every life has an expiration date, and it doesn't match up with the time we think we have. Because there's a reality for most of us, a lot of us in this room, in this country. The reality that you will run out of time before you run out of money. That is the idea. And the problem is time is not for sale. You have an expiration date. Abundance does not equal security. It doesn't mean that you're okay if you got a lot of stuff. Remember what Jesus said before he told the story? Life doesn't consist of an abundance of possessions. An abundance and possessions don't give you security. That's just foolish thinking. Foolish thinking here in this trusts wealth to guarantee personal security and certainty. Because I have stuff, because I have wealth, I will always be secure and I can be certain of my future because I'm wise and I plan well. But that's foolish thinking, because wise thinking realizes that they have an expiration date, so they invest with eternity in mind, using their worldly wealth for lasting impact. That was one of Scott's main points last week from the shrewd manager parable. Wise thinking people realize they've got an expiration date. And so investing what they have needs to be in eternal things, using worldly wealth to create an eternal impact. Because think about it, security and comfort don't come from stuff. You never hear people, if they've got tragedy in their life, and hey, I know that you lost that loved one, but you've got a solid bank account. Nobody says that. Nobody says, I get that, your family's gone off the rails, but, you have some great vacations. Nobody says that. Nobody experiences tragedy and goes, well, but my house has a lot of space and it's nice. Nobody says that. That's foolish thinking. Because the reality is we've got to be investing in something different. Because what's going on in this story, Jesus started it off, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. He says that's the problem. It's greed. It's wanting for, as throughout the parable, yourself. And we often disguise it as being wise, saying, I'm just being, secure. But really, we're looking out for number one. A few weeks ago in the relationship series, I talked about humility and how that's so opposite of what we are ingrained in, because we think it's all about us. Greed makes you think it's all about you. So how do we break the power of possessions? How do we guard against greed? What are we supposed to do? Jesus says, hey, look out for that. So Jesus, what do we do? How do we keep possessions from possessing us? How do we keep greed from creeping in and be seeming like wisdom, but really it's just about us wanting to acquire more? How do we break that? Well, in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus covered a lot of things. But one of the things he talked about in Matthew 6, verse 22 and 23, give us a little insight of how to break this thing called greed, how to stay away from being possessed by your possessions. Here's what Jesus says. The eye is the lamp of the body. If your eyes are healthy, pause there. This is a brand new thing to me in the last few months. Unpacking this verse, Jesus saying, it says, the eye is the lamp of the body. You see things, you gather stuff in through your eyes. If your eyes are healthy, if you're seeing things healthily, that word right there can also be translated generous. If your eyes are generous, your whole body will be full of light. If your eyes see things not with what's for me, what's for me, what's for me, but with, hey, how can I interact and give in this situation? How can I be generous? If everything you see, especially the abundance poured out on you, you're looking at with eyes, with generosity, your whole body is going to be full of light. You're going to be a light bearer. But he warns you about the opposite part of that. But if your eyes are unhealthy, that can also be read stingy. If your eyes are stingy, if you see stuff and think, I better hold on tight to that, because if I don't, I won't get it. I'll lose it. If your eyes are stingy, your whole body will be full of darkness. That's a dark picture. And then he says, if the light within you, if what you're seeing is darkness, oh, how great is that darkness, Jesus says. If your eyes are all about the stuff and how it belongs to you, it will darken your world. Personal experience in this. I used to think I was being wise. I struggled with letting people borrow things. I didn't mind having, good equipment, but I struggled with letting them borrow it. So my answer was a wise decision, thinking, I'll just look even better. Well, let me come and bring that tool over and I will help you / do it for you. Because I couldn't let go of some of my possessions to let other people use them, because they might break them. They might use them wrong. That was my eyes being stingy and not generous. So I've been working on that, because I don't want my life to be full of darkness. I want my life to be full of light. So how do we break this? How do you break this grip that greed can have on you? Well, this is how. Generosity breaks greed's grip. If you've got eyes to see things generously, if you see everything that has come into your life as an opportunity to share and bless others, it breaks the power of greed. It breaks that selfishness. Now, it sometimes breaks it really hard where it hurts. And sometimes you have to do it over and over and over again and then over and over and over again. But it will break that power of greed. And it'll realign your soul with eternity. The power of greed is a strong thing, but the power of generosity is stronger. Said I wanted to close with another story. A story about an incredible, incredible woman. Got a picture over here. Osceola McCarty. Easier to say than some of those French names. This is Osceola. She was born in 1908. I'm not sure what age she is there, but this was her not long before her passing in 1999. Let me tell you about her. She lived here in the United States in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. When she was in 6th grade, her aunt developed an illness, needed to be hospitalized, needed some home health care. Her aunt had no children. And so she quit school, never to return. She became a washerwoman later on, like her grandmother, and a trade that she continued on until arthritis in 1994 forced her to give that up. Well, before dropping out of school, McCartney, she was a saver, something that had been ingrained in her by her mother. So she opens savings accounts. In fact, she opens several savings accounts. Her first one was at the First Mississippi National Bank. And over the years, she put money there and in several other accounts. This was a person who never owned a car. She walked everywhere she went. She had a shopping cart that she would pull to go get her groceries. When she needed to go somewhere, she rode with friends, most often riding with friends to attend the Friendship Baptist Church. She didn't subscribe to any newspapers because that was an extravagance that she didn't think she should spend money on. She owned a black and white TV set, but no cable, just the radio, the antenna. In 1947, she was given a house, a small house by her uncle that she lived in for the rest of her life. When her aunt passed away and when her mother passed away, there was a little bit of money, very little bit of money, but she, guess what, saved it. She put it away. And it was through these habits of hard work, and especially of saving and being focused on not an extravagant life. When she retired in 1995, her hands not allowing her to do that washerwoman work, because she did it by hand. She'd been paying in these little piles of coins and dollar bills, because she didn't get paid a lot. It's discovered she had saved $280,000 of a little bit here and a little bit there. And even more startling than that amount on a washerwoman's salary, her earnings, was that she decided to give most of it away. Not as one of those bequests at the end of her life, but pretty much immediately. You know, the bank had noticed this and they had come and talked to her, and so she decided she's going to set aside just enough to live. Remember, she's a frugal lady. Just enough to live. Some bank employees had to convince her that it'll be okay to buy 2 window air conditioner units. They're in Mississippi, remember. They had to work at her to get her to do that, because that's an extravagance. And with the assistance of her attorney, she had actually done laundry for, using slips of paper, and she used dimes. She used those to represent 10% shares of this money she'd accumulated. So she set aside a dime for her church, 10%. She set 10% for each of 3 relatives that were still there that she wanted to care for. And then 60% for the Southern Mississippi University, with the stipulation that those funds be used for scholarships, preferably those that were African American descent who could not otherwise afford going to school. She donated $150,000 to the university. And remember, the rest of that she pretty much gave away too. Other people saw what she did and they jumped into. And so now, every year, Southern Miss gives to those that can't afford it several full tuition scholarships to students that wouldn't otherwise be going to college. Because Osceola was blessed with abundance and wisely realized it wasn't just for her. She knew that giving is its own pleasure. When People magazine came to her and were interviewing, when this became a national thing, they asked her why she didn't spend a lot of that money on herself. Here's her answer. With a smile, that kind of smile. She said, I am spending it on myself because I get joy from this. So yeah, it's for me too. Because Osceola decided that the abundance was something she needed to ask God, what do I do with this? She blessed countless lives. She had wise thinking, not foolish thinking. She realized that generosity breaks the grip. So how do we do that? How do we let generosity break that grip on our lives? Practically. Scott shared a path last week. This path called the generosity journey. And I want to put to you today that starting off participating in this journey will help break the power of greed, the possession of possessions. The steps were really simple. If you've never given, if you've always thought this is all for me, give something. Something. Maybe it's giving a possession away. Maybe it's funds. Give something to something outside of your circle of influence so it's not yours to care about anymore. Take that step if that's you. The next step, if you're an occasional giver, you do that. Work towards becoming consistent at doing that. Do it more often. Do it on a regular basis. If you are one of those consistent givers, give intentionally. Don't just give, but give intentionally like she gave intentionally. Invest in kingdom things that have eternal impact. Give with intention. And the last one, if you're an intentional giver, stretch yourself and give sacrificially and saying, okay, I won't have some things so I can give. I will give up to bless and invest in kingdom things. That's how we break this thing. That's how we become people that are not caught up in greed, not caught up in the possessions that we have, but that we walk to a different beat, that we follow a different rabbi than the world's rabbis. Because Jesus said, life does not consist of an abundance of possessions. It's more than that. Because stuff doesn't necessarily give you a good life. See, the difference between living a good life and just living the good life is what eternity is about. If you would, stand. I'm going to pray for us. And if you need to take a step on that generosity journey, I encourage you to take it this week and break the power of greed. Father, I confess to be challenged by Jesus' words. Father, I look at all the stuff that you've given me that I hold on to too tightly. So, Father, I pray that you break that grip of things in my life. And, Father, for all those listening, whether here in the room, Father, whether online, watching this later, Father, I pray that the words of Jesus will go to our hearts, that life doesn't exist in this stuff, but that we can bless eternity with this stuff. So, Father, let us hold things with open hands and give generously to invest in your kingdom and your righteousness. And, Father, you've promised you will still take care of us. Father, maybe not in the way that we'd like or accustomed to, but you've promised to take care of us. We lift all this in the name of Jesus. Amen.